Hey guys, it's Alex, and I am here with a very potential TBR for the Booktube Rereadathon 2019. I am one of the hosts of the Booktube Rereadathon 2019, along with Abby Mac Reads and Alyssa from Sushi Dragon Master, and the goal for this rereadathon is to reread 12 books in 12 months for all of 2019. All of the information and announcement videos will be linked down below if you're interested in joining in. Today, I just wanted to share with you my TBR and sort of what I'm thinking about reading. If you followed my channel for a while, I'm sure you know that I'm not very good with TBRs. I don't follow them, I just ignore them. But I think it might be a little bit different for this just because I've already been thinking about rereading a lot of these books for a while, and I've sort of already planned-ish what I'm going to be rereading. Because it's only one or a couple of books a month, we'll see how it goes. You may never see any of these books again, and that's okay. There are also some months for which I plan to reread multiple books, and I have like different options, so this is all very potential, very hesitant, very maybe, written in pencil. I don't do year-long TBRs, I'm not that good at planning, but I wanted to sort of talk about the different challenges and what I think I might be reading for them. The challenge for January is to reread a book that was a first for you, and because it's already January, or it will be when this video is going up because I'm pre-filming about 2 weeks in advance, I already know pretty much set in stone what I'm going to reread in January, and that is The Song of the Lioness Quartet by Tamora Pierce. I forgot her name there for a minute, even though she's one of my favorites. I plan on reading the whole quartet because like they're very small books and like I can fly through these in 2 or 3 days. So the first book is called Alana the First Adventure, which makes it a first. That's not the only reason I picked it, but it could be. You can do whatever you want with these challenges. This was also the first book I read from Tamora Pierce, the first book she wrote, and the first high fantasy that I really fell in love with, because I was not a very big high fantasy reader when I was a child. I really still am not a big high fantasy reader. My friend gave me these books, and I was so, not annoyed, I was like, thanks for the books, but you know, they're about a girl who's becoming a knight, and not my thing. And then I read them like a couple years later and was like, these are amazing. I need to buy everything else she's ever written. And I did. And I just think these books were the first time I ever realized that I could read something that wasn't realistic fiction and really love it. Because prior to that, there'd been Harry Potter, but that was sort of more like a middle grade thing and my childhood thing and not something that I found later on in life. So really excited to go back to these because I haven't reread them in ages and I used to reread them all the time. February is Reread an Underrated Book, and I'm not sure 100% what I'm planning to reread yet, but I think it's going to be A Season of Daring Greatly by Ellen Emerson White, or potentially another book by Ellen Emerson White, but this one I've been meaning to reread for a while. It's about a teenage girl who becomes a professional baseball player, and it's a really realistic look at like how the baseball system works and like what might happen if a girl was drafted by Major League Baseball. It was really good, and I gave it 4 stars at the time, but I'd really like to reread it sort of having better expectations going in, and maybe see if it would be a 5-star read a second time around. But I also might read another of Ellen Emerson White's books. March is Reread a Book that someone recommended you, or buddy read a book, and if you're buddy reading a book, your buddy doesn't have to have already read the book. It just needs to be a reread for you. I'm considering reading The Lost by Daniel Mendelsohn, which is a nonfiction book about the Holocaust. One of my professors in college recommended this book. Not specifically to me, just in general. He said about halfway through, he got sad, not because the book was sad, but because he realized he would soon exist in a world where he was not reading this book. I read it and I loved it, and I haven't reread it since. I only read it the one time, and now I have this very pretty edition, and I really need to reread it. I might also potentially buddy read a book, but that's in March, and I haven't thought that far in advance yet. So there might be a buddy read going on sometime in March. And also, if you'd like to buddy read any of these books with me, hit me up and we can make it in March. April is Reread a Book Set in a Different World, or Reread a Book Set in a Different Country or Culture. And for this, I have 2 options, one for sort of each. The first is 1,000 Splendid Suns by Khaled Hosseini. I read this a few years ago, not too long after it came out, and I really loved it. I liked it a lot better than The Kite Runner. But I haven't reread it since, and I'd really like to, because I do plan on reading some of his more recent books that I haven't gotten to yet, and I'd sort of like to go back to that one, because I did love it so much. The other option I have is Wild Magic, or the whole Immortals quartet, because if I start this one, I'm going to read the whole Quartet because they're really, like Alana, they're really quick reads. They're also by Tamora Pierce. And I really love them. They're high fantasy, so set in Tortile, which is clearly a different world. I might go with either of those options, or I might go with both. And that's true for any of these that I have multiple options for, because a lot of the books I want to reread are YA, which means they are quicker reads for me, and it really wouldn't take much for me to reread a couple of them in the same month. And honestly, that's kind of what I want to do for some of the months. May is reread a book from a genre you don't read very much anymore. I plan on reading a middle grade mystery novel, probably Hardy Boys, because I used to live on Hardy Boys when I was a kid, and I haven't read any recently, and I love them. They made me so happy. I have an entire shelf of Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew and Boxcar Children, even though it's like 2/3 Hardy Boys because they were my favorite. Nancy Drew just scared me a little bit too much. I don't know if I'll be reading this specific one. I just grabbed the first one that I saw on my shelf, but I want to read at least one, maybe a couple, just to return to my childhood. I also might take the opportunity this month to reread some middle grade historical fiction diaries. Again, maybe not the specific one, it was just the first I grabbed, but I loved these so much as a kid. They were some of my favorites to read, and they're such short, quick, easy books that it wouldn't take much to go back to them and just like read a couple and see if I still love them, because I really did so much at like age 10. The challenge for June is reread a series or reread a book from a series, and I plan to read all of Harry Potter, the whole series. Honestly, that was kind of why I picked this challenge, just because I knew one month I was going to read all of Harry Potter, but you don't have to read a whole series, just like one book that is a part of a series is fine. I plan on having just like a week in June where I binge read the entire series, because I used to do that every year, and I haven't in a very long time, and I'd like to get back into the habit. July is reread a book from your favorite author, and for this I have two options. The first is The Virgin Suicides by Jeffrey Eugenides. I haven't read this book since high school, but I read both this and Middlesex and adored them both. He instantly became one of my favorites just for his writing style, and I loved the writing in this book so much, and the first-person plural perspective. I've never read another book like that, and I thought he did it so beautifully. My other option is The President's Daughter series by Ellen Emerson White. Again, I love this series. I don't know if I'll be choosing it just because I don't know if I can wait this long to read the whole series, but I might. She's one of my favorite authors, and honestly, any of her books that I've already read, I could reread this month. I might be switching these with A Season of Daring Greatly, just because I'd rather read these sooner rather than later, but we'll see what happens. August is reread a second chance book, and again, two options. The first is Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. I read this in college, and it wasn't that I disliked it was that I didn't understand what I was reading. I retained nothing. It might have been a great book, but it was one of those books that just in and out, and I had no idea what I'd read. So I'd really like to give it a reread and see maybe if I do actually dislike it, or maybe I like it, and we'll see. I feel like this doesn't count as my having read it, just because I read it because I had to, and the words were just flowing through my head without retaining anything. The other option is 1984 by George Orwell. I read this in high school and really disliked it. And I also really disliked Animal Farm, but I'm not ready to give that one a second try. But I was so young when I read this, and I don't know that I will like it reading it again, but I would at least like to read it as an adult and have a greater understanding, at least, of why I dislike it. But hopefully I'll like it a second time around. September is reread a book that is labeled for below your current age group, and I have two YA books for this because I'm an adult, so that's no longer my current age group. I plan to reread The Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, the whole series, including Sisterhood Everlasting, because I've only read through it once and I'd like to give it a second try. And also Not Otherwise Specified by Hannah Moskowitz, because I love this book. I've read it several times, and it's a great book. It makes me happy. It's so well done. It's like one of those books that I would almost consider a perfect contemporary YA novel. It's so great, and not enough people have read it and love it. October is reread a book that made you cry or a book that made you emotional. And I have 3 books for this that all make me cry. They've all made me cry. Well, 2 of the 3 have made me cry multiple times, and the third I've only read once. The first is Ribbons by Laurence Yep. This is a middle grade novel, and I sob every time. I don't know why. It's a middle grade novel about a girl who does ballet, but there's something about ballet that makes me cry so hard. I love this book. I've read it so many times. It's one that I always pick up if I want to cry, but it's fantastic. I also have A Mango-Shaped Space by Wendy Mass. Have read it multiple times, have cried multiple times. I love this book. This is like a classic middle grade novel almost. And I'm surprised by how many people haven't read it because I thought it was one of those books that like everyone has read, but apparently not, and it's one of those books I feel like everyone should read because it's so good. It's so good. It's one of those middle grade novels that makes you realize as an adult how much emotional depth middle grade novels can have because this is amazing. And then finally, one of my favorite books from 2017, We Are Okay by Nina LaCour. I love this book. I love Nina LaCour. And Michael, who hosted the Rereadathon in 2018, actually requested that I reread this book, which I'd already been planning on doing, but I'm definitely going to do it just because Michael asked. I loved this book. It was amazing. It's such a short, quick read, but it was so heartbreaking and emotional, and I've wanted to reread it ever since, and I actually just bought this copy last fall, and haven't had a chance to read it yet, so I'm very excited. In November, the challenge is reread a book that was written or set before you were born. I have, once again, 2 for this one. The first is Written on the Body by Jeanette Winterson. This was published in 1992, and I was born in 1993, so it just barely makes the cut. But I read this right after I left college, because it had been assigned for a class in college, and I never read it for the class. But it's one of my favorite books now. It's so amazing, so beautifully written. And I was just looking for an excuse to read it, which is why it technically counts. And then the other book is Middlesex by Jeffrey Eugenides. He also wrote The Virgin Suicides, which was earlier on this list. This book is a family saga, so it does take place over multiple generations, which means part of it, a good portion of it, takes place before I was born. And I loved this book in high school. It was amazing. The way he crafted the story and the generations of the family was beautiful. But it does deal with an intersex main character at one point, and I'm very unsure about how well it's done. I was like 16 when I read it the first time, so I'd really like to read it as an adult and see if I still love it. I may also find a historical fiction book to read for this prompt, but just off the top of my head, I couldn't think of any that I really, really wanted to reread, so we'll have to see on that one. The final prompt for December is reread a book you associate with a holiday or reread a holiday book. And for this, I really struggled. I created these challenges and hadn't really thought about this one. I was like, anyone, any holiday, anyone can find a book that they associate with one holiday or just reread a holiday book. That's easy. And then I was thinking about it and I really couldn't think of any at all. So I have one that's kind of a stretch, but I'm going to keep thinking because I'm sure I have one that I'm just blanking on. But I have The Books of Pelennor by Alison Croghan, which I might reread earlier in the year as well. We'll see what happens. But this is a high fantasy novel, and I don't associate it with a holiday in our world, but there's a holiday they celebrate, which I don't remember what it's called, but I think it happens in summertime, and it's like about rebirth, and the leader of each like town or settlement or whatever they're called, I don't remember, creates a tree of power, and there's like a really big thing about it. And I don't know if it's in the naming or if it's in the riddle, but it was a huge deal, and it's one of the things I remember the most strongly from the books, like that I just pictured in my head, and for that reason I'm sort of counting it towards the holiday prompt. But we'll see. I think I can come up with something that's a little bit more literal, but if I don't, that's fine. This counts. Your interpretation of these challenges can be as broad as this. There was a holiday in this book that I remember, so it counts. I really do remember that holiday very strongly, and it's just one of those scenes from the book that I can picture the most easily. And Cadvan having to help because the Tree of Power almost failed. I don't even know if it was called a Tree of Power, but if you've read this book, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm just explaining it horribly. So that is my very long list of the books I'm planning to reread this year and all the various possibilities for all the challenges. If you were stuck on any of the challenges, maybe this helped you get some ideas of your own and the way you can interpret things. You can interpret them very broadly, as I have for some of these, or you can just be very exact. Let me know down below if you're planning to participate and what books you're looking forward to rereading the most this year. I am so excited that this is finally starting because I've been thinking about this for months, and excited enough to post a very long-winded TBR for the entire year. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see y'all again soon.